Hello and welcome to another video from TechBeats. We're going to practice brute forcing access to a website form today, and we're going to be using Hydra as the tool, DVWA, which is hosted on a Kali virtual machine. So get ready and we'll get stuck in. Okay, so task details. Firstly, I'm going to cover 3 points. Point number 1, the objective. What are we trying to do? Number 2 is the tools. So what tools do we actually need in order to do this? And 3 is the intel. So what information do we need to then pass through the tool and make sure it's successful? Going through that in order then. The objective. What we're going to do is try to log into a website form as an existing user by guessing the username and password fields. So for this, we'll need an online password iteration tool using a technique known as brute forcing. Now, brute forcing is the process of iterating different values against an entry point or a field, similar to when you forget your username or password and guess a few times until you're basically successful. Brute forcing essentially does this on a bigger scale and much faster. Now, time taken, if successful, is dependent on factors like password length, complexity, number of fields, i.e. just the password, or both username and password, number of entries in the word list being used, and processing power are kind of all the main considerations. There's also a bonus objective. Most people only find that there's one username and password pair, but there's actually more. So I'll give you a little clue into how you might do that, and then we'll cover it at the end as well. Now, the challenge URL is /DVWA vulnerabilities brute. So that's what we're going to actually brute force today. Now, the tools needed, as I alluded to earlier, at least the main ones, is DVWA server on a virtual machine and Hydra. Now, Hydra, I'll show you just on the screen here. There, Hydra loads up. Now, Hydra is described as a parallelized login guesser, basically a tool to guess valid login / password pairs. Now, the alternatives to the tools that we've mentioned, so Hydra, we could also use Potato, and also to extract information and iterate as well, we could use OWASP Zap and Burp Suite as well. Now, using Burp Suite has the benefit of being able to extract information that you would otherwise need from the web browser developer tools, but that's what we're going to use today. Now, disclaimer, this tool, Hydra, should not be used to attack websites or services where you do not have permission to do so. Use this for legitimate purposes only, and a reminder to read the README section on GitHub if you haven't done so already. Now, with that out of the way, let's move straight on to step 1, the infrastructure. So we're going to open a new terminal. So you can do Control-Alt-T. And we're going to start the DVWA server. We need to type in sudo service mysql start. Enter your password. That's done. And then same again with the Apache web server. So Apache to start. Okay, that's the backend sorted. Now, Hydra will come already installed in Kali, but if you need to install it, then I'll leave a command in the links below. But essentially, all you do is sudo apt install Hydra. That's all you'd need to do. Now, I'm not going to run that because I do already have it, and we can check the version as well by inputting Hydra -- version. Okay, so that confirms I've got version 9.2. Now, important note, there was a reported bug, which I didn't experience, but in version 9.1, and the current version is 9.2. I've got the latest repository as it stands. So 9.1, if you're running that, you may encounter a problem. So I'd suggest you update if you haven't already. Next, on the topic of repositories, we're going to update repositories here. Sudo apt. There we go, I've typed it before. So apt-get update, and you can concatenate or combine that together. So that's and sudo apt-get install, and then give it a Y for yes. Enter that. I'll just make the text a little bit bigger as well, just so you can see. That's Control Shift and plus, if you wasn't aware. Right, once that's done, we are ready to launch the browser. So we can do that from here as well. And I'm going to use Firefox and can just press the forward arrow key to enter a command that you've already done in the past. You can also use the up arrow as well. Right, so we're on the main login page for the DVWA. On some forums, I have seen people, they're trying to basically attack this path. That's not the actual module. You can do that, but it's not what we're going to cover today. The actual task is the next path, which I'm going to show you. So you log in here as normal, admin and password, and we can confirm that we're logged in as admin. When you are practicing on here, these are the sections that you're actually practicing with and on. So we're actually going to practice the brute force in the actual brute force title page. So that's this one here. So when you go in here, this is the login page that you're trying to brute force. That's the actual task. Now, step 2 is just understanding the prerequisites. So this is essentially a web-based form. Now for this, you have to know certain information before you can actually start the iteration process with any tool, especially Hydra. Now think of this as specifying and narrowing down a target location. Every web-based form is slightly different URLs and parameters, and different responses for successes and failures. If you don't know quite what that means, it'll become apparent as we go through the video as well, so don't worry. Now moving on to step 3 is essentially what we need to feed or pass into Hydra to actually make it work. So the sections that we need, I'll just go over as an overview, is the hostname and IP. This is effectively the DVWA web server folder name in this case. The URL service method or scheme, however you want to address it. Basically the protocol to access the resource. So whether it is HTTPS or HTTP, which is basically the service or protocol, and the form type. So is it a GET or POST? We also need the parameters of the request as well, which we'll put in double quotations. We need to provide it the relative path to the target location. We need to obviously give it the iteration field. So we direct Hydra where to actually iterate and guess the fields, and also with what data. We need to set a flag, and that establishes the difference in the response between what a success looks like and what a failure looks like, and make sure it knows which one we're using and the message relevant to it as well. Now, session cookies, whether any session cookies are required is something that we need to check, whether it needs to be set or maintained as well. There could potentially be lockout features as well. So that's a protection policies to prevent things like brute forcing. Now, if there are, we can potentially try and work out what the timing of those lockout features are and what thresholds apply, and we might be able to bypass that as well if they apply. We also need to formulate word lists, so we could use existing ones in the Kali repo, or we can create ones as well, which we'll probably do for the purpose of making the exercise a bit easier and not too time consuming. And the port number as well. The port number used should be automatically established by Hydra when the method or scheme section is defined. Now, the port number should only really need to be set if using a different port to the officially known port numbers, or maybe if there's an error as well. We won't be defining port numbers, but it will be port 80, which will basically be visible when Hydra executes. Now, this will change to port 443 if we installed an SSL certificate on the web server, which we haven't and we won't today. Now, step 4, we're going to actually start building the command for Hydra. Now, the parameter or information extraction, if you like, there are multiple ways to extract the required parameter information, but we're going to use the web developer tools within the web browser, and we're going to examine the client-side source code. Now, in Firefox, the shortcut is Control Shift and I, and we're going to keep that menu open and navigate as follows. So let's try that now. If we click on the web page itself, anywhere, Control Shift and I is a shortcut, and you'll get the developer tools up. Now we're going to click on the network tab in the dev tools and then click on the brute force menu on the DVWA website. Now notice you should see some data flow. We're going to look for the top or latest entry, which is going to look like this. There we go. So now you've seen some fields come in. We want the top and most recent one. I'm going to just single click that, and notice how we've got some additional information here now. Let's break this down as to what we can see. Now, this section here, this data tells us the status of the request. So when we click brute force path, so we received a 200, which is essentially a successful OK message from the server, hence the page loaded. Now, the method is now confirmed as a GET request, which we can see next. This is used to request data from the resource, and POST, if it was that, is used to send data to a server to either create or update a resource. Now, the domain confirms the domain name of the website as localhost. If you've entered the localhost IP address, then basically you'll see 127.0.0.1 instead. If we look at the file, this shows us the relative path to the location. So already you can see how we've got some of the information that earlier we said we'd need. We can start to build out the command section now. So let's bring up terminal, Control-Alt-T. The first thing we can do is we call the application. So we're calling Hydra. We can also now enter the hostname or IP. So either will work. So we'll put in 127.0.0.1. The URL service method or scheme and form type we can now put in, which is HTTP form get. Now the following is going to be within parameters. So we need to enter quotation marks here, and then we'll enter the arguments inside. Now we've also got the path, so we can copy that across from here. I'll just type it so we can keep the screens up. So DVWA vulnerabilities root, and then we can close that path with a semicolon. Now for the next part of the command, we need to select the relevant elements from the web page to understand the naming convention, so i.e. the name value field. Open the browser inspector using the shortcut Control-Shift-C. The first element we need is the username. So click on the section in the web page and the respective element will be highlighted in the DevTools. Now we'll do this again for the password element and also the login button. So we should see the values that I'm going to show you now, and just pay attention to the name equals values. Control-Shift-C, and then this is the username here. Click that. Now here it tells us the name value equals username. That's what we need. We'll do the same for password. Control-Shift-C again, and we can see the name, password, and then lastly for the login, we actually need two values, which will be the name and the input type, because we're not iterating this value. We effectively want to simulate the clicking or entering of that credential. So we can now formulate the next part of the command, so iteration fields. So we can now use the name values and instruct Hydra to iterate the name of the fields, and then using Hydra syntax, direct the payload points as well. So we separate the fields using an AND symbol. We want to automate the processing of effectively clicking the login button for each login attempt or iteration. So we use the name and input type value instead. So I'm going to show you what that looks like. We can start to build that out too. So we enter username will equal user, which is the Hydra syntax, and password, so remember that's the name value of the relevant field, equals, and then Hydra syntax is pass, and login equals submit. Now you could probably just get into the habit of copying and pasting this, but I'm trying to keep the screen open, so I'll type it instead. But up to you how you want to enter it. You just might get some spelling errors if you do that. And then we close this section using a colon. Now we can build command section 3. So we'll look at the flag. So we can find out the message output if we enter incorrect credentials, which is basically known as the failure flag. Now you might know the message of a successful login if you have an account in the same domain and able to confirm the output. What we're going to do is work on the failure message. What we need to do is find out what does it say if you enter incorrect credentials, and that's the failure message. So let's enter arbitrary information, something we know is wrong, and then just type anything in here. Let's click login and see the message that we get back. We get a string of text here. So this is the output. So here the error message we can say is username and or password incorrect, and you can include that full stop as well. Now, the logic with the flag parameter is that the success message is the string value we are explicitly looking for, so i.e. like the allow or whitelisting policy of a firewall. The failure message is the string value we want to drop. This will be returned as an anomaly, which in theory would be a success message, like login successful. So to put it another way, the success flag is to look for a string versus the failure flag, which is looking for the absence of a string or field. Now, one tip is remember that the failure or success string does not have to be part of the HTML of the page. Now, these strings could be information in the response headers, such as cookies set or locations or redirects as well. Now, there are flexible options for dealing with the responses as long as there are definitive differences between the success and failure message output. Just in case you didn't know, in order to paste into the terminal, you click Control, Shift, and V. So let's take that across and we'll paste that in. So Control, Shift, V. And now we've got our failure flag. Now we just need to define that as the failure flag by F for failure equals. Now, moving on to command section 4. Now, I just want you to think or act like a computer for a moment. So if we log out of the DVWA website in a second, you're back on the login page. Now, we have given Hydra the path of DVWA vulnerabilities brew. However, when you enter this URL that we've actually given, you'll be redirected to the login page URL path, which is dvwa-login.php, at least in this particular setup. So this would incorrectly instruct Hydra to iterate the login-php path and therefore run the iteration unauthenticated. The failure message for that page doesn't match our intended page, therefore Hydra is unable to establish what a valid credential set is using the failure message given when it thinks about reverse logic. So if you're using the rocku.txt word list in Kali, you'll end up with, I think it's 16 valid login pairs. That's why that's happening. So you'll find that out if you inspect the response and requests, basically. We need to log in and provide Hydra the session cookies so that it can pass or redirect from the dvwa-login.php path to our desired path of dvwa-vulnerabilities-brew. Now, if you don't do this, then Hydra will basically use the values given and try to iterate on the incorrect path as mentioned just a moment ago. I'm just going to show you that for a second. So if we copy this path and do what we're telling Hydra to do, we need to log off for a moment or log out, telling Hydra to do something where it's not at this stage yet. And then what it's first going to do is enter the path that we've given it, which is that. So localhost DVWA vulnerabilities brew. And let's just watch what happens when you do that. There you go. So you end up on this login page, which is the main login page, not the path that we want. So notice the path here is the login.php, and we want to iterate against vulnerabilities-brew. So hopefully now that makes sense as to what I'm trying to explain. So let's log back into DVWA. And the first thing that we're going to do is just change the security level to low. That's the level at which these videos are going. By default, it will usually be set to impossible. So I'm going to change that to low. And I can see that's been passed here. Now, what we need to do, we need to be back in the developer tools here. We'll go on the network tab, and then we're going to click on the top entry again, is here. We'll stay in headers, and we'll scroll down to request headers here and change the format to raw. So that's the toggle button here. Now what we can do is copy the cookie value in full. Now we've effectively, by doing this, allowed Hydra to use a valid session so that it can see the actual and intended target location path that we've given it in the terminal. So let's do that now. Now, if you can see the security level, that should say low. So without refreshing it, I can just update that in terminal. We need to enter H equals and then paste those values in. So Control Shift V, and we can just change the security level to low manually. And then we've got the PHP session IDs that stands for and the value here. Now we'll just double check we've got all of the fields here. And that looks like it's all made it through. So happy there. Now, if you've ended up when you run the command with excessive login successes, then it's probably likely that you haven't added the cookie at all. You've not added a valid session cookie. You've not entered it, or you've entered it partially, or used the incorrect syntax. So just be aware of all those points because they could potentially cause an error. Now we know cookies are often used in web authentication, so let's start by examining the cookies our browser has. So after we enter the cookie value, we can actually close out the command there. So that's where the end of the double quotes would end up. So we can now close the parameter after the PHP session ID as shown in the terminal here. So I entered it in advance, but if you haven't, that's where you now need to enter that in. Now I mentioned lockout features. Now there doesn't appear to be any kind of lockout features here, but if there were, what we could do is use a time delay for the iteration attempts using the timer switch t equals a value. So if we then put t equals 1, you'd need to put that at the end of the command, and that example would delay the iteration attempts by 1 second. We don't need to do that, so we'll leave that out. We do, however, need word lists, so we need to actually give it some data to actually feed in, because what we've said here is to iterate username and password fields, but it hasn't got anything, or we haven't told it what to actually use. Now we can create a word list or download a list and provide the path to it. For the sake of time, we're going to create a short word list. Bear in mind, the longer the list, the longer the iteration will take. Now for now, we just need to provide Hydra the name and the path of the word list if it was located in a different directory. If we already knew one of the values, i.e. that the username was admin, let's say, then we can simply pass this to Hydra, which saves the time to iterate that field. When we know the value of a username, we use the switch in capitals, which is -L. And if we want to use a word list, then we use small l. And the same logic applies to password. If we know the password, we use the -P. And if we want to pass a word list in there, then we use lowercase p instead. Now to enter values or words in a file, we simply add some arbitrary words and then press Control. Now to manually create a quick word list, you can simply open a default terminal session and enter the name of the editor and the name that you want to call the file, followed by the format, like this. So we say nano, which is our text editor, and we're going to call ours username.txt. Press enter, and here you can see I've put some arbitrary fields in here. We could enter another one and leave it like so. Now to save it, you press Control and O, then enter to confirm, Control X to come out of it. Now create another word list for the password list. I've called mine password.txt. And then you need to make sure in the username list that you've actually added admin as an entry, and in the password list, the password as an entry, because they're the actual correct values. If you don't add those, then basically the iteration won't be successful because it's not going to guess the correct username and password fields. Now, of course, this is not a real life scenario, but we're understanding how the application works from an educational perspective, so we can also automate the creation. Now, you also need to create another word list for the password list as well. Now you need to make sure that you include the actual username of admin in that file, so the username.txt or whatever you've called it, and the actual password of password in the password.txt list. Just to avoid any confusion, the actual credentials are admin password, so you need to pass those in the actual files that you're going to create. Otherwise, the iteration can't be successful. Now, of course, this isn't a real life scenario. What we're trying to do is understanding how the application works from an educational perspective only. Now, we can also automate the creation of a list using Crunch, which is another tool on here, which is basically a password creation tool. You can also use the ready installed word list like RockU. Basically, Kali stores the word lists in the path of ls. We'll just list it, and that's user share word list. So you can also use a ready installed word list like rocku.txt. Kali stores word lists in the path of user share word lists. If you ever want to find something or locate a file, then what you can do is use the locate switch. So I'll show you an easy way to do that. So let's say we didn't know where the rocku file was. Just type in locate rocku.txt and press enter, and there you go. It will tell us exactly the path of where that is. Finally, the port number. Now, the port number used should be automatically established by Hydra when the method or scheme section is defined. Port number should only be needed to be set if using a different port to the officially known port numbers, or perhaps there's an error. We won't need to define a port number, but it will be port 80 in our scenario, which will be visible when Hydra executes. Now, this would change to port 443 if we'd installed an SSL certificate on our web server, but we haven't, and we're not going to do that today. So once you've created your lists, what we're going to do here is just add the switch dash capital L and then the name of your username file, base it, and then dash capital P and then the name of your password file. If you double check that you've got everything there, it should be okay. So we've basically now constructed our command, which is ready to be executed in Hydra, and just make sure that the format and the syntax is all correct. So it's ready to go and you don't have an error. Now, if we hit enter, let's see what happens. Okay, so we haven't got anything back. And I've just noticed my path is wrong. So this commonly happens, and probably a good way that we can debug this now. So we're still on the security page here. So it could be that the cookie value respective to that is not correct. So let's click brute force again. Make sure we're on the right path. Click here again. I'm going to just take the raw values like we did before, and I'm going to guess that they're probably different. So now that we've got in there, our security is set to low, which is correct, and that's what it should have been showing in the first place. And we've got a different value for the PHP session ID. So let's copy that across, and hopefully it works. If not, we'll see what else is wrong. So to bring up the previous command, we can just press the up arrow, and then to move back to it, we can press Control and the left arrow. We can just move in between rather than singular. And we're going to delete this out. So we'll paste that value in, Control Shift V, and we'll just amend it. So let's try that again, see what happens. There we go. So that was obviously what the issue was. So it was the cookie value. So double check that if you get a similar issue. So what is this telling us? This is the port it's used, so port 80. As I mentioned earlier, we would see that in the execution. The method that it's used or was successful, the host that we defined, and this is the login username and the password, so admin and password. The Hydra has successfully iterated the values within the word list that we provided on the right page and in the right fields. It has used the failure flag that we defined to identify the responses header, which basically did not contain the F value we added within the command. So essentially using reverse logic. Now what we can do is try and confirm the result by logging. Now we can confirm our result by trying to log in using the credentials provided by Hydra, and hopefully let's see what happens. It said admin, or sorry, username was admin and the password was password. Log in. And sure enough, we have now successfully logged into the admin area as it states here. There you go. So that's Hydra and how it works. Now for future attempts, here's another tip. We can now use the success flag if we wanted to. So as we can now see what the response is of a successful attempt, we could use this as well, which we didn't know before until we logged in. So we've got two values now. We know what the failure message is. We also know what the success message is as well. Now we can rerun the command in verbose mode by inputting the -v switch. And if we use double V, that'll be for extra verbose. Now, this basically allows you to see the real-time iteration attempt. So I'll show you what I mean. Bring up the last command and we'll put -vv. And I'll just make this a bit bigger so you can actually see. Press enter. And here you can see a lot more activity going on. But that's the verbose mode of what it's doing there. So I used -vv, which was extra verbose, but we can just make it lightly verbose by putting a -v singular. There we go. And that's the two differences if you needed that level of information. Now, if you wanted to save the results in a file, you can simply add the output file switch, which would basically be something like -o and then the file name. So it could be myfile.txt, and then you press enter. Don't need to do that today, so we'll leave that out. Now, here's a little bonus objective. I'm just going to minimize out here. Now, as ethical hackers, what we need to do is be highly curious and be interested to explore. Now, see if you can find additional hidden information on this page, and it may help as a little tip or clue to explore using the developer tools that we've used today, and especially the inspector, which we used before using the shortcut Control, Shift, and C. Now, if you want to try that yourself without me giving it away, then pause the video now and then try and see what you can find. And once you've had a go, either found it or you've run out of time, come back and resume the video and I'll show you what I found. So let's do a little bit of exploration. So we've got the values here, and a really neat tool that I like is the inspector. So you can either click it here or Control Shift C. So you can start clicking around and see what values correlate to where you click. So here we've just got a HTML header size. We already seen the username, password, login values. And then just underneath, if you have a look here on the screen, is if we go to this section here, let's just click that so it holds it. What it says is the image source. So this is where it's pulling the image from this location source. DVWA hackable users admin .jpg. That's the format of the photo. Now, if we copy that, what we can do is just try and see if anything comes as a result of it. So copy the link address and let's duplicate a tab. And enter it here. And we just need to tidy this up a little bit. Okay, let's press enter. Okay, so that just brings us the JPEG image. So not a huge amount of fun there. So let's just go back a path. Take the format of the picture out. So the requested URL was not found on the server. We were not able to go to that path. We'll go back another step. Okay. So we shouldn't find this. Well, you shouldn't find this on a proper website. So it says the index of DVWA hackable users. If we click them, okay. So we've got photos of people as well. So what it looks like is like the gravatar. So people have added an image or gravatar of their photo to their actual login page. So here's Pablo, Gordon B, admin. That's the one that we used and got into. 1337. And then parent directory. Okay, so if we have a little look in here. Okay, so that just takes us back to where we are. Flags. Okay, so maybe this is for another exercise. So it says, nice try, use the file, include next time. Back again, uploads. DVWA email, PNG. Okay, that gives us the format of an email. So that might be useful in a later task, I'm guessing. And users, so that's where we were. Okay, so nothing else really at this session that's of any use, but what it looks like we have is the usernames of other users. So if admin is our username, then we can assume a logic of saying 1337 is someone else's username, Gordon B is someone else's, Pablo is someone else's, and Smithy is someone else's. So potentially we've got 5 users in total or another 4 users that we can iterate. So if we go back to Hydra and we can use this now to formulate a different command. So essentially here, going back to something I said earlier, is the -L switch here is when we want to pass a list. Now in our case, potentially we have the actual usernames of people. So we used a small l and we put 1337 as the username and then the password. Now the password list that I made probably won't guess it, but I'll just show you what happens if I do. So it tried to iterate the target, but 0 valid passwords found. And that's probably just because in my list, if I show you, I've only got those entries. So obviously what we do know is the password for 1337 user is not one of these. So let's come out of that. Now what we could do is use the rocku.txt file and iterate against that and see what happens. So we locate rocku in that path. Now, to avoid making this video too long, what I'll do is iterate these values one by one and see if we get anywhere. Fingers crossed, and we'll see what happens. Hey, and now look at that. So here's my command that I entered. So basically all I changed was because I knew the username, or at least I assume I do, we used the lowercase l and put 1337 in. And then for the password list, I've given it the path to rocku.txt, which has a lot more passwords, possible passwords in there. Now this took about a couple of minutes, and here it told me localhost, and then login is 1337, and the password Charlie. So if our logic is correct, we can enter this credential pair, and we should see this JPEG instead. So let's have a go at doing that. So we type 1337 and Charlie, which is allegedly the password. And look at that. We're now entered the password protected area for 1337 user. So here we can take that off. And there we go. We've logged in as another user. So what I can do is use the assumptions and use that information to try and log in as those other users as well. So let's give that a go. So admin is us already. We've already done that one. And then we'll use Gordon B JPEG. And this time it won't take too long, but I'll fast forward the video anyway. And then I'll just keep going one by one and see what happens. So now we want to change the username value to Gordon B. Press enter and let Hydra do its thing. There we go. Right. So that one was a lot quicker. And it's saying login name Gordon B and password ABC123. So let's give that a go now. Gordon B and then ABC123. So that worked first time. So now we're in the password protected area of Gordon B, which is a different user. So next person on our list is Pablo. We'll give that a go. And we just need to change the value here to our friend Pablo. And we'll try that again. Amazing. And there we go. So we've got login Pablo and password let me in. Now I've got a feeling this is also going to work because so far it's all worked. So let's click brute force again, so reset that. So we said Pablo, and then the password was apparently let me in, login. There we go. So now we entered the password protected area of Pablo. Going well so far. And the last person we've got is Smithy. Now with this one, I'm going to actually put it in verbose mode so we can actually see what's going on. I'll use the single V switch because otherwise it will just fill up the screen. And we'll just make this a little bit bigger. So up arrow to bring the last command back. Control arrows to navigate across. And let's put Smithy as the username. And we'll also use the verbose option. So dash capital V. And then let's see what's going on here. Oh, it found that straight away. Now, that one was a lot quicker because that password combination that it tried was higher up in the list. So that's why it's quicker. So if it takes longer, it's further down in the list. So this one is going to be easy to remember. Login, username is Smithy, password, password. Final go. Let's give this a go and see if our luck still remains. So Smithy and password. Enter. There we go. Perfect. So welcome to the password protected area of Smithy. So there we go. So we've covered everything, including the bonus. Hope you found that fun. I know I certainly did as well. So that's kind of what we're looking for as ethical hackers, someone to design protections in place. That's what you kind of need to do. You need to be able to explore, look around the system, have a look and just see what's in there and just click around, see what happens when you do something, try different combinations of something as well, and you'll just have loads of fun and you'll have a blast. So that's everything to cover in this video. I'll drop some links in the description below for some useful links to information that I've covered in this video. But otherwise, thanks for watching, and any comments that you want to go over, drop it in the comments below as well, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Thanks for watching.